So, we're heading into harvest, at least up here, and it's kind of a dangerous time for people, right? There are a lot of accidents that happen, and I know that farm accidents, are something you've done a lot on. What insight do you have on farm accidents that regular people might not know much about?
You know, once you get that machinery moving, particularly at harvest, often at planting as well, but once that machinery gets moving, people don't realize, Vance, the immensity of it and the noise it makes and the dust that it kicks up. And when you have all of those things combined with long hours, then you are invariably headed toward danger. And that's why you consistently see deaths out there in agriculture, no matter what kind of safety measures they put on you. And, you know, families get wrecked. And I mean, just it's like taking a hammer to the ankles of a family where you might have the young scion of a family that's maybe he's 25 years old and the only son, and he goes out to the field and he dies. That by itself is bad enough, but when you look at the legacy, then it becomes all the more traumatic. There was a wonderful young man named Brock Gussius up in North Dakota, one of the most bizarre deaths, so sad. He was the only son. They had a farm, a row crop farm, and they had an export business as well. His daddy did, Roger Casillas, fine gentleman. And Brock was tilling one day. I can't remember how many years it's been, but it's not been long at all. And I think Brock was 28, 27 at the time. He was tilling, kept a little dog with him in the cab. This could be anybody. And that dog had to go to the bathroom, and he let that dog out of the cab. He stopped the tractor, and the dog got down, ran into the field, and saw a mouse. Like would normally happen, and the dog started trying to kill the mouse. And, 9 times out of 10, Brock would have drove on, but he didn't. He got down out of the cab and went to check on the little dog. I think the dog might have been a rat terrier. It was a small dog. Anyway, the mouse was laying there, and Brock assumed it was dead, and he picked the mouse up, and it bit him on the hand. He got back in the cab, mouse bite, no big deal. What he didn't know was that at that very moment, he had just contracted hantavirus from the mouse, and that infection was already roaring through his veins. He was dead 10 days later, Brock was. Nobody had any idea. And he checked himself into the hospital, I think, like a week later. And they just thought he was low on fluids. No one had a clue that he had this very rare hantavirus. I think the mortality rate on hantavirus in the U.S., something like 40%. Don't quote me on that, Vince, but it's bad. It's bad. So they sent him home from the emergency room. He continued to farm. They were at planting, and his body wore down on him, 28 years old. He walks out of the cornfield, drives home, goes into his living room, literally writes his will down on a piece of paper. So this fella knew something was inside his core wrong, writes his will down, puts it on the table, and goes and lays down on the bed and figuratively never gets back up. His family then comes to him. They take him to the emergency room, and he dies in the hospital. So it was 10 days. It was 10 days from start to finish. Anyway, that's the only son. That just, it pulls everything out from the feet of a family that's left entirely devastated. That's just an example. But Vance, the guys that lose fingers, the guys that lose digits, you can't even keep track. The one that, it just blows me away. There's several blowing me away, but there was a guy named Samson Parker a few years ago in North Carolina. Samson, I think at the time would have been maybe in his mid 40s, and he was on his way to work. He worked in highway construction, but he had 50 or 100 acres of corn that he would sell for deer corn. He needed to go harvest that day. So he made his way to the fields. He lived in North Carolina. The farmland was in South Carolina, an hour away. So he drove down to his fields, complete isolation. And he got in his tractor. Don't quote me on tractors. Don't know much about tractor. I think it was a John Deere 2840, maybe a 75 horsepower, something like that. Smaller tractor, not a huge one. And then behind that, he had a 1960s one-row picker, and then behind that, he had a wagon. So he had a caravan, Vance, 3 vehicles. He's by himself in his field, driving through there, one-row picker, slow going. He got a flat tire. He stops the vehicle, attaches a pump to the tire to reinflate the tire. It takes a long time. And he goes around behind the picker. So he's behind the picker, the wagon's behind him. And he noticed that the picker was filling up with trash and not discharging properly. Tractor's turned off. And there was a piece of corn that was stuck in these rollers. I think there were 6 perpendicular rollers, and they were separated by less than an inch. And that corn was wedged down in there, and he yanked and yanked and couldn't get it out. So he thought, okay, I'll go around and turn the tractor on, and it'll shoot it out. And he did so. He came back around, and it was still there. And he made the mistake. He had on gloves. He made the mistake to grab it. And as he grabbed it, it pulled his hand through. And immediately, right, his description, immediately, chunks of his hand through the glove began to roll down his arm. So he's reaching through the back of the picker. He's got meat coming down his arm, and he's entirely alone. And that thing is just pulling him into the machine, literally pulling him into the machine. He's a big guy. He's like 6'3", 6'4", 200 plus pounds. He did everything he could to get that thing stopped. So he stuck there for an hour and a half, 2 hours, and he takes off. He really takes off all of his clothes, takes off his boots, throws them over the top of the picker, takes off his
how
belt.
long was he there for?
That part of it, Vance, that part where he's stuck with his hand in there took, I think, an hour and a half plus.
Oh, my God.
Yeah, and he described the pain. He said, I can't even label the pain. I can't tell you about the pain. He said the pain was otherworldly. He said, I literally am watching the flesh continue to roll down my arm. So he threw every hard object that he had on him almost inside the picker to try and get those bars stopped. He couldn't get them stopped, and eventually reached behind him where the hitch was on that back trailer. And he managed to pull out a cotter pin, and he got that thing, and he reached around blindly to the side of the picker, which was running, right? And he managed to jam it in the chains and the gears on the side of the picker. And he couldn't believe it. And his claim is, he straight up tell you, this was Providence that did this, not him. The picker wedged and stopped. It lurched. He got the thing stopped. And then with it stopped, he attempted once again to pull his hand out. He could not get it out, could not get the hand out. So that morning when he left from his house and he sat there on the bed and put on his work boots, there was a brand new John Deere knife that had been given at a NASCAR event by a dealer. This thing had never even been used. It was sitting on his dresser. He didn't carry a knife. He told me, and his wife told me, that not one day in his life had he ever carried a knife. But on that day, he stopped by the dresser, dropped it in his pocket, and went on to work. So he remembers this. He reaches in his pocket. It's like maybe a 3-inch blade, back knife. It's small.
Oh, no.
He reaches over the top of the picker, and he says, you know what? I'm going to cut my hand off, and I'm going to get out of here. So he told me the feeling was mainly gone out of his hand, and he began to cut. He cut the first finger off, couldn't get it out. Cut the second finger off, couldn't get his hand out. Cut the third finger off, and by the time after he cuts off the third finger, he still can't get it out, and he smells acrid smoke. And what had happened, Vance, was that while he was cutting off that third finger, the machine, right, in its protest, the machine is in open rebellion, and it was beginning to throw sparks. Slip clutch was beginning to throw sparks, and the sparks were landing on the rubber tire of the picker, and it actually caught fire. So while he's got the knife, the machine catches fire, and instinctively, he drops the knife. So he loses the knife, it drops into the picker, and as it drops in the picker, everything catches fire, and he'll tell you. He says, man, when your arm and your hand catches fire, he goes, and you can't move it, he goes, you can watch the fat roll right down your arm and onto your elbows. You can just watch it, because I can't describe the pain. So he tried everything he could do, tried to pull his arm off. He's on fire. The machine's on fire. So he knew then, I've got to cut my arm off, but he didn't have the knife. He had dropped the knife. So he blindly reached over the thing. He said, the first time I reached over, I grabbed the knife, He said, that by itself was providence. He said, I pulled it back out with my other hand, and about an inch or two below his elbow, he said, I stuck it in and I began to cut. He said, I passed out immediately. He said, I passed out immediately. He said, I think I was out for about 20 seconds. He said, I wake back up. I'm still burning. The knife is stuck in my arm. He said, I continued on around. He said, I cut the whole circle. And I asked him, I said, how long did it take you to make that cut? He said, I don't know, maybe 15 seconds. He said, no, I was fast. It was a sharp knife. And then I pulled. Vance, once he pulled, then he still couldn't get out. The bone wouldn't go. So he squatted down, jumped up in the air as far as he could get it, then brought that arm down on the side of the picker wall, and he snapped that bone. And when he snapped the bone, the picker tire blew. It blew him back 3 or 4 feet. He jumps up, right? He's in his sock feet, and he runs through the field, blood shooting 3 or 4 feet, gets in his cab, and takes off for the highway to get some help. And once he got to the highway, nobody would stop because his whole cab was covered in blood.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Eventually people stopped to help him. And what was interesting, when I was talking to the guy that stopped to help him, a fireman, a wonderful fellow named Doug Spanks, Spanks said that, he goes, man, when I crawled in that cab, he said, there was so much blood inside the cab. He said, I could taste it. I said, what do you mean? He said, it was in the air. He said, there was a metal taste in the air. I could taste his blood, even though I wasn't touching it. That really struck me. Anyway, what's bizarre detail, when the fire department went back to put that fire out, they found his forearm, the bone, and they found the 3 finger bones, but they couldn't find the knife. Weeks or months later, some family friends were out there playing in the field. 2 little boys found the knife that he had used about 20 feet away. So Samson Parker figured that when that tire blew and blew him back, the knife must have shot that far back. So today, if you go into the Parker house, it's on the wall in the kitchen. That knife is. They keep it there as a reminder of, they say, what God did for them. And you know, Vance, keep in mind, that's one story of many that are out there. But he is a far, 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 far tougher man than me.
Oh my God. I mean, 30 seconds of that. And I can imagine that I'd give up. Like to any one of those steps would be enough to just absolutely level a person. This is
right.
But he's okay now. His family lives
Right.
on.
He's got an artificial arm, but he's gone on with life. He speaks at lots of events, and wonderful family. Him and his wife, very, very, very decent people.
Wow. Holy jeez, man. That was a story.
Thanks for checking out this podcast short. If you like this interview, hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe. Also, if you're interested in these kinds of conversations and you want to support the podcast, you may consider joining the Articulate Ventures Network. There you can get classes that will help you become a tangibly better communicator, but you'll also be introduced to a wide network of people that have different ways of thinking and live all over the world. We hold classes and sessions that help people practice saying what they think and getting feedback on how good are those ideas and how well did you say them. So if you're interested in joining that, go to articulate.ventures to find out more.